Sam is a character that you can say is round, for he has made changes in his life, and his actions throughout the story would be optimistic, nice, but also kind of bland kind of man, with some inner conflicts that uh, are hard to describe due to all the changes in his life. He's a middle aged man and he's a neighbor. His life is really quite suburban. He's a widower, for he has lost his wife and he has a lost friendship with Cliff, so he is a man that has lost a lot of things in his life. He used to be a big drinker before, during the times in which he fought with Cliff, and he has made changes in his life. Those are justified by the quotes. Sam had lost Millie, gotten married again, and became a father again in the space of no time at all. But this can also show that he may not have grieved properly her wife and his wife and his own life, sorry. And that also says things about his character, like the lack of dealing with problems. In page 55, when he says, I quit, one might infer that Raymond Carver is referring to alcoholism and that Sam stopped drinking, because alcoholism is a motive throughout all of his stories, and because of the references that are made implicitly throughout this story, you can assume that it's about alcohol. And you can see that he still wants to be friends with Cliff. Like in page 34, he explicitly says, I wish me and Cliff was friends again. And this also can show that he has a lot of regret in his life, and that he also mourns for his previous life and his wife and all the time that they spent together.
And also, as a secondary character, we have Cliff. He's Nancy's husband, and he's asleep slash paralyzed throughout the whole story. And we see him through his wife's eyes, so we don't know what he looks like or acts like. But we know that he's asleep and he's sleeping, and he got mad at Sam. But we see that Nancy is telling us that. Um, like I said in the first quote, I tried to wake Cliff and he was passed out. That's how we infer that he's alcoholic, because he was passed out, and that's the word that describes best alcoholics. When they sleep, he passed out, so he is not responding to Nancy's claims of wanting to talk to him. He's selfish to Nancy because he's taking decisions without her consent about building this fence and not talking to Sam anymore, even though she doesn't know what happened exactly. Um, in page 32, we see this quote. He was taking up his side of the bed and most of mine. He's being very abusive towards Nancy and taking her space just to satisfy his. And I gave Cliff a little shake. He's cleared his throat. He swallowed. I don't know. It made me think of one of those things Sam was dumping further on. Um, in this part, Nancy is comparing him to the slugs, and that's a comparison we see throughout the story. But it's a way of Nancy making a comparison that doesn't make much sense, and it doesn't describe Cliff as a whole, just as a thing that moves and just doesn't do anything. It slips.
Millie is a linear sort of character, for there is really few descriptions of her, and her presence as a character and inside the story is that of a ghost, for she is completely unseen throughout the story, because she died at the age of 45 of heart failure that triggered a car crash, and that is shown explicitly in the story. There is not much said about her except that she had been a good friend up to me until she died. That is a quote by Nancy in page 33, and she represents all the things that were good and that are now gone, and also she represents a lot of past memories. Millie is one of the characters in the story that you can see with no troubles at all, and I think that is because she is dead and she only means things. And despite being really quite bland, you can see that this is a character whose absence generates great changes in her atmosphere.
The setting is almost in Nancy's house because we see the story throughout her eyes. And in the neighbor where Clive and Nancy and Sam live. So it almost all the story happens in Nancy's room, Nancy's house, and in the backyard where it shares the land with Sam's house. So we see that it happens in both of their houses, and um, most of the story is Nancy wondering about Cliff being asleep and then retelling the story of how Sam and Cliff became enemies. We can say that. And, and the moon can also be a reference to the setting with the quote, a big moon was laid over the mountains that were around the city. It was a white moon and covered with stars, and its full could imagine a freezer. The moon is accompanying the story throughout the whole story, and it's a way of telling us that it's at night and all the story happens at night. So the moon is uh, a big reference for us to know that it's a night and that the mood is very very calm because it's night and the moon is there and it's only light shining in the story. As for literary resources, we see personification and colloquialism in page 31 with the quote, "It was a white moon covered with stars, and its damn fool could imagine a phaser." And we see colloquialism with the words damn fool, and it's the way Nancy is supposed to be talking because she's talking to her own thoughts and not talking informally to herself. So those words are not supposed to be said in any private situation, so she's just talking to herself. And personification with the comparison of moon and face, because a moon can't have a face, and even fools, as Nancy is suggesting, can imagine a moon with a face, so it can't be possible. We see synesthesia in cliff snorts because you can, even though you can't hear them, you can imagine how it will be heard throughout the descriptions of Cliff snorts, because we know that he is sleeping very, very much, and that his snorts are being very loudly. And hyperbole with the quote, "The moon lighted up everything, houses and trees, poles and power lines, the whole world." Um, it's kind of a hyperbole because the moon, even though it can highlight some part of the world, it can highlight the whole world as the us as a whole, because we know that in some places it's night and at the same time in some others it's the daytime, so it can't highlight the whole world. But she is using that expression as telling us that the moon is so big that it can highlight the whole world, even though at some places it is night and in some places it is the daytime.
Imagery is also really important for the story, especially the one of the moon, for it's the one that sets all the setting and it sets the atmosphere for the things that are going on. That is really intimate and dark and personal. And despite that, it's a really bright night, and that is why Nancy says she could see the smallest things. The imagery of the big bright moon is really important because without it, the story would have not taken place. And speaking about the smallest things, there is also an important thing regarding imagery that is the slugs. For not only the frenetic way in which Sam is trying to jar them, they are described deeply and they like represent in a way all the small slimy things, as it said in the end of the book, that could be like the little problems that are not usually dealt with and that can be jarred inside of it. But the sliminess and the smallness of the slugs is an important description to speak about the problematics in the characters' lives.